so I just got back from a road trip with my wife, and as you might be able to see, I got a bit of a sunburn. So where did we go for that to happen? Rainy old Cornwall, England. Yeah, it was time to go back to Old Blighty, and I guess my only superpower in life is to get a sunburn even when it's raining outside all the time. If you know how that might be useful, let me know. Anyway, this wasn't just your regular old road trip to Cornwall, if there can even be such a thing. Nay, because it actually was the first part of my wife and I's baby moon. Because yes, my wife and I are going to have a little sun-fearing baby at the end of this year. Anyway, with those exciting news out of the way, a quick word about the format of this video. So last year I made 11 videos, vlogs to be more precise, about my wife and I's road trip through southern England, and it has been watched by literally dozens of people, which is a nice way of saying that those videos bombed so hard. I guess that's no real wonder, as those videos are pretty much the modern day equivalent of making your kids suffer through a 3-hour long slideshow of a holiday you've been on 15 years ago, with the only difference being that you are not my family, even though some of you still insist on calling me daddy. The thing is though that these travel videos are some of my favorite videos that I've ever made. And so I decided to still make a video about this road trip for those of you who might actually want to watch it. But this time around I'll do it the same way that I did about 2 years ago for our trip to Iceland and to New York, and just make one long ass video about it. This video is also going to be very much focused on the photography side of our holiday, which is not too hard because a holiday usually in my case is just one big long and drawn out excuse to shoot photos all day. So anyway, I guess the main idea here is pretty much that even if nobody ends up watching this video, it won't fuck up the algorithm for me as badly as those 11 videos did the last time around. With that being said, in case you don't care to watch the full video, but you want to watch at least the most exciting parts of it, feel free to jump right ahead to day 5, because that day was, in my opinion, the best day of the whole trip. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about gear for a second, because gear is pretty much the only thing that matters in photography and in life in general. So, what gear did I bring then for this trip? As you can imagine, this is something that I agonized over for weeks, if not months before the trip, even though we just booked the trip the day before we actually took off. But thinking about my camera gear is actually one of my favorite pastime activities, and also the source for most of my depressive episodes in life. So here's the thing. I actually wanted to buy a Leica M system this year. The problem is these cameras are ridiculously expensive, as I'm sure you know. And as you've just found out, my wife is also pregnant. And so going out and splurging on a Leica M system really didn't seem like the sensible thing to do right now. So no Leica M for this trip, and that pretty much only left me with 2 options. Either go for the dumb man's Leica M, aka the point and shoot Leica Q2, or go for the poor man's Leica, aka the Fujifilm X100VI. And since I couldn't decide between the two, I simply packed both, as well as my Sony a7 IV and the ZV-1 Mark II to shoot this video. Basically, I just brought everything that I had. So did I miss not having a Leica M on this trip then? Yes, I did. More on that later though. Lastly, just as a general rule for this video, all the photos you're going to see in this video will be shot on the Leica Q2 if it doesn't say otherwise on the screen. What about my EDC gear though? Well, I simply took the stuff that I carried in my pockets over the past 5 months or so anyway. Meaning my beloved Taurus Cam Grain wallet with a EDC tool card and a pen, my trusty old iPhone 13 Pro in a leather case, a Rovi Von A2 stainless steel flashlight, my Zin 104 on a vintage leather strap, and my Victorinox Cyber 2 Large, and I was perfectly happy with this setup. So let's begin. And as every good road trip should, everything started way too early on a Sunday morning. Thankfully, my wife agreed to drive for the first few hours of our journey so that I could shoot some B-roll and also take some photos on the passenger seat. And while I didn't exactly get a lot of hardcore Instagram bangers, I at least got a few half-decent ones that kind of capture the vibe of that part of the trip. Cloudy, slightly rainy weather, and just going with the stream on the autobahn. With only a few minor traffic jams on the way, we eventually reached Dunkirk in time and caught our ferry to Dover, but not before getting a coffee at the service station in Dunkirk. The coffee wasn't half bad, not gonna lie, and I even got a photo or two there, but the toilets at the entrance emitted such an unbearable stench that my wife had to leave the building in what can only be described as a full-on knees-to-chest sprint. Outside, I got this shot of a seagull between two benches, and after I showed my wife how long my lens is, we actually boarded the ship, which always feels like an event as these things are just gigantic and overall super fascinating. They really speak to my inner 10-year-old. Anyway, on board of the ferry, we did our best to avoid being anywhere near the screeching masses of teenage school kids and found an area that was mostly empty. I took a couple of shots here and there with my Q2, nothing spectacular really, but I liked the atmosphere of these shots. It was mostly cloudy, but also fairly bright that day, and with the diffused light bouncing off of the inside walls of the ship, everything was lit in just a very pleasing way, I think. After just lounging about for a while, it was finally feeding time, but since food on public transport is usually god-awful, we decided to just share some fish and chips, which actually turned out to be rather tasty. With our lunch eaten, I got bored, and so we ventured outside to see what's up there, and with the desperate screams for help of a kid that was being thrown overboard in the background, I went to work with my Leica Q2. Okay. Now, most of these shots are pretty mid, as is usually the case for me, but for whatever reason, I really do like this one. The light, the colors, the weighting, I don't know, it just works. I got a few more shots outside, and then again inside the ferry, and eventually we arrived in Dover. So I switched the dash on my car to miles an hour, and we headed off for a 50-minute drive in this strange land full of people that were super keen on driving on the wrong side of the road. We had made a reservation for a bed and breakfast in Maidstone, not because we wanted to visit Maidstone, but because we didn't want to do the entire 1,400 kilometer journey in one go. And it was rather nice. The B&B was super charming and Maidstone didn't look too shabby either. So that evening, we just got a burger and collapsed into a deep and dreamless slumber. The next day, we woke up bright and early. A bit too early perhaps due to the difference in time zones. On the bright side though, that gave us the opportunity to explore the surroundings of our B&B a bit before breakfast. And so, we went for a little wander. Truth be told, before our trip, I probably didn't even know that Maidstone existed. But it turned out to be rather nice, considering it's not a small town by European standards. I started by taking a few shots of our B&B and then proceeded to simply taking photos of the surrounding neighborhood and random people's houses. After being chased off by an angry mob of people who didn't appreciate me taking pictures of their property, we decided to do the next best thing and went off to shoot some photos at a nearby playing ground. We eventually made it back to the B&B in time for a very hearty, full English breakfast. With about 2 kilos more on the scale and our arteries clogged up, we dragged ourselves back up the stairs to our room, where I got the chance to finally be useful for a change, because for whatever reason, the door handle of our room had gotten loose, which in a worst case scenario could have meant that we would be stuck in our room screaming for help. But since I carry a Victorinox Cyber Tool, I was able to save the day and just screwed the handle back on tight using the bit driver and included bits. After that, we packed up our stuff, filled up the car and went back on the road. On the second day of our trip, we had another 7-hour drive ahead of us until we would finally reach our first destination, Falmouth. It would be a long and grueling drive, and in full solidarity with my efforts, my wife, of course, agreed to keep me company. Anyway, I set the cruise control to 69 miles per hour, nice, and went off. About halfway into our journey, we stopped for a quick coffee at a rather lively pub in the middle of nowhere, and I took some photos. After that little stop, we went on our merry way, and the guy at the bed and breakfast had told us that Falmouth is super beautiful when it's sunny, but in the rain, he said, not so much. Honestly, the drive dragged on a bit, but overall everything went smoothly. And so we arrived in rainy Falmouth at about 4:30 and checked into our Airbnb for the next 2 nights. Luckily, our Airbnb was not only very charming, but also just a 5-minute walk away from the town center. And so I voted that we should go out and grab a little snack for dinner, and also I wanted to snack up some images on our way into the city. Contrary to what the guy at the B&B in Maidstone said, I think Falmouth is actually a beautiful little town even in the rain. And by beautiful, in this case, I mean dirty, grim, a bit filthy and super wet. I got a few halfway decent shots to our burrito place, nothing to write home about I guess, but I like this one of my wife standing in the middle of this alleyway. Anyway, that was pretty much it for the second day of our road trip. After we got back to our Airbnb, we just ate our burritos and spent the rest of the evening hunched over the toilet. Just kidding, of course. But we were pretty beat, and so we just went to bed really early. But then day 3 came around, and it would actually be our first day in beautiful England without any driving. First though, it was time for a coffee. Sadly, the weather really wasn't working in our favor, and it looked like we had yet another full day of rain ahead of us. Nonetheless, our spirits were high as we wandered back into town for the first scones of our trip. Okay, so there is this little bakery in Falmouth that we've actually been to on our last trip, and we really liked it a lot. We actually thought that it was just like a small local bakery, but as it turned out, it's one of the largest bakery chains in the entire country. Still though, their shit's real good, and so we were super keen to get our first scones, the proper way of course. So I did some research ahead of time, and by research I mean I googled it, and there are apparently 2 ways to eat your scone with jam and clotted cream. There's either the Devon way, which means that you put on the clotted cream first and the jam on top, or the Cornish way, so the proper way for our location, which would be to put on the jam first and the clotted cream on top. Mind you though, clotted cream has pretty much the same consistency as a fairly soft butter. And so spreading it on top of jam is really not a simple task. Honestly, I really don't get it. We tried it and I have no idea what that stuff is all about. If you're from Cornwall, please let me know if I got anything wrong, but personally, I really preferred the Devon way. But on a more important note, we also got a great view over the harbour from the bakery. And so I whipped out the old Leica and took a few photos. After stuffing our faces with baked goods, we decided to walk it off and go window shopping for a bit. And it was then that we rediscovered one very annoying thing about Falmouth and English town centers in general. Now, I'm certainly not against cars or motorized vehicles in general, quite the opposite, but I do value a walkable inner city. And therefore, it was a bit sad to see that apparently you could just drive your car even through the very heart of the town center. A bit annoying if I'm honest, even though I appreciate the frequent sight of sweet old Land Rovers. Anyway, my wife soon discovered a bookshop, and since she can easily spend hours on end in a store like this, I just quickly stocked up on moleskin notebooks and then went off on my own little photography mission. I grabbed a quick snap of this dog that was sitting in the front door of that shop for basically the entire day, as well as just a few shots of the main shopping lane, and then went on towards the harbor area. While I was there, I took a few shots of the city as well as their trash cans, oddly enough, but they were really stylish in all black with golden accents. It's like one of those super fancy modified Lama Socco espresso machines, or like the Daniel Craig edition Leica Q2. but as a trash can. So I tried to somehow make it work with the 28mm lens and get the trash can as well as a bench as well as some seagulls in frame, and I think I got a couple of decent shots, but nothing I was completely happy with. Even though this one was pretty close, if it wasn't for those lampposts sticking out of the top of the trash can. I then tried to get a few shots of just the bench with the seagulls, but that didn't really work out either, since the seagulls just blended into the background, especially with the overall grey and cloudy atmosphere. Slightly frustrated, I moved on back up the shopping alley and found a store that sells cameras, camera bags, Victorinox knives, Leathermans and some other knives. And as you can imagine, if you've ever watched any videos on this channel, I just had to check it out. Now the guy who runs that shop is probably living my dream. However, I didn't really find anything that I actually needed, and so I decided to just buy a keychain Opinel number 4 as well as a stainless steel Opinel number 7, which was kind of a stupid thing to do because I can get those a bit cheaper since we live just about 20 kilometers from the French border away. But I just liked the shop, I sort of wanted to support it, and I also wanted to get those Opinel knives anyway, and so I guess we can sort of just call it a win-win. Anyway, I met back up with my wife and we strolled around the town center a bit more. Now I didn't shoot a lot of video of it because after all this was our baby moon, but I took a few more photos with the Q2. When it was eventually time for lunch, we went to a small seafood restaurant, got a few bites to eat as well as a beer or two for me, and then went back to our Airbnb to just hang out for the afternoon. Later that evening then, we went to another seaside restaurant called Indie Dog for dinner. Really lovely food and views. I tried to get a couple of snaps of the interior of the restaurant, but I didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable with my camera, so I was really quick about it and the shots didn't exactly turn out great. So after our dinner we went for yet another stroll along the harbor area. Much to our surprise though, this time around we almost got something akin to a sunset. Now we couldn't actually see the sunset and the sky was still mostly cloudy, but at least we got some of that offshoot ambient sunset light in the sky, which made for a great atmospheric look in my opinion. Eventually we dragged our lumbering asses back up the hill to our Airbnb in hopes of catching the actual sunset on the other side of that hill, but after running into a few dead-end roads we simply couldn't be bothered any longer and gave up. And so this is the closest that we ever got to actually seeing that sunset. On day 4, sadly, it was already time to leave Falmouth again because we had another Airbnb looked in a small place called Carbis Bay near St. Ives. Now we had never been to either of those places before, but we heard great things and so we just wanted to check them out for ourselves. Also, at least according to Google Maps, it was just a 45-minute drive away from Falmouth, so no big deal really. Well, that's what we thought anyway. More on that later. First though, we had to pack up our things and we actually got to see a bit of sunlight for a change. In fact, as we would soon find out, it would be a rather lovely sunny and warm day. So yeah, we packed up our stuff, left the Airbnb and went back into town, and of course I took a few photos here and there on our way in. Let's party! We then, once again, went to grab breakfast at the Cornish Bakery, and yes, I couldn't resist taking a couple more photos while we were there. It's super interesting to see how much the look of a location can change just because of a slight change in weather. I actually liked the moody and overcast look we got the day before, but I have to admit that a beautiful sunny day like this is just something else. We then went for another round of shopping and actually bought a few things for our yet unborn kid. We also revisited that bookstore and I found a few books that were really interesting and ended up buying a book called See What You're Missing. I have only started reading it on our way back home, but so far it has been great and a fascinating read. I think this scene really sums up most of my photography quite nicely. It's just a random assortment of trash. But since people in the comments keep telling me to be a bit more positive about my work, I will say that I was actually rather pleased with a few of the shots I got on our walk through town. Especially when we got to the harbor area at the other side of the main shopping lane. Considering how grey and moody Falmouth had been for the previous days, it's incredible how vibrant and colorful it looked as soon as the sun came out.
He's wandering off.
Also, on a side note, I really like the mix of having that super bright sunlight and blue skies in the foreground with those towering clouds looming in the background. It's exactly what I wanted, and so I can only assume that I have finally tapped into the power of weather control to make that happen. Anyway, we spent a good while just sitting at the harbor, pensively reflecting and pondering existence on this beautiful day. But soon it was time to head off. So we grabbed a quick lunch at a place called Sapsi, which was actually not only tasty, but also healthy for a change. After our lunch, it was almost time to take off, but we also wanted to visit the beach before actually leaving Falmouth. Don't worry though, you won't have to suffer through the sight of me in bathing shorts, as it was still fairly cold, so we simply wanted to go for a little walk along the beach. And then, sadly, it was finally time to really wave goodbye to Falmouth, and we went on our merry way towards Carbis Bay. We simply followed the sat-nav system of my Audi, which turned out to be a really bad idea, as it led us down some of the tightest and sketchiest side roads I have ever seen. So, thanks to that stupid sat-nav system, the drive took about twice as long as it would have if we had just stuck to the main roads. And it also probably shortened my life expectancy by about 2 years or so because of all of the stress. Anyway, we checked into our Airbnb, which once again was lovely, and of course, I took a couple of quick interior shots. We eventually decided to go for an evening walk down to the beach of Carbis Bay, and we honestly didn't exactly know what to expect, but it was easily one of the more beautiful places I've ever seen. Lovely little houses with great views over the bay area and the sea. The restaurant down at the beach is actually a Michelin star restaurant called The Ugly Butterfly. It looked amazing and we actually thought about trying to get a table, but then we remembered that we aren't rich and scrapped the idea, and instead we went back to our Airbnb and ate some stuff we had brought with us from the Cornish bakery. Then day 5 came around, and not to get you too excited or anything, but it was probably the best day of the entire trip. When the day started, the weather still looked rather grim, which wasn't exactly a problem since we were planning to go to Land's End in the morning, and we thought that that sort of weather would probably be the perfect fit for that sort of place anyway. And we were absolutely right about that. After a quick leftover breakfast, we took off, once again stupidly trusting the sat-nav on our car, which immediately led us once again into some of the tightest bullshit sideways streets we've ever seen. We eventually made it alive after being almost run over twice by tractors, and after a quick fill up at the gas station we made it to Land's End. And so we put on our hiking boots and off we went. We spent a few minutes at one of the main viewpoints, but it was honestly a bit boring since everything was fenced off, and so we decided to go a bit further down the path to see what's up there. Luckily, you really don't have to go too far before you can properly stand on the edge of those cliffs.
Spinning left and twirling through the back door of your heart. And every time I think of you, well, something happens in my mind. And every time I try to leave,
You can just walk down here.
you're keeping me
Spray it.
occupied. I'm losing track of time. Losing track of time.
I took a lot of photos there on my Leica Q2, as per usual, but let's be real here. A 28mm focal length is not exactly ideal for that sort of setting. So truth be told, I ended up cropping in on most of the images that you are going to see from the Q2 here, which luckily is not a huge problem with that high resolution sensor. I also took a couple of snaps with my A7 IV and the Tamron 20 to 40mm, which still wasn't ideal, but 40mm at least has a bit more reach. However, a lot of the images from both cameras ended up looking rather soft and bloomy for the simple reason that there was just a constant spray of fine-grained raindrops smothering the lenses, and it was just an impossible task to constantly wipe them off. Eventually though, the weather cleared up a bit, which solved that issue and also gave us a bit more light to work with. We got a few images of this rock formation, which to my eye looks like the sea is giving a huge middle finger to the entirety of England. And trust me, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Anyway, we actually ended up spending a few hours at Land's End, mostly just dicking around and enjoying the views, but it was a really great time. When we finally got back to our Airbnb, it was time to get some lunch and also to visit St. Ives, which was just a short 20-minute or so walk away. And we actually got the recommendation from our host to use a path called the Coast Path, with the specific note that it would provide great opportunities for photography. And yeah, I guess it did, in a way at least, with some nice views of St. Ives in the distance or some colorful boats near the beach, but I really couldn't utilize most of those opportunities because I was stuck with my 28mm Q2. So instead I decided to once again just take photos of the streets and random people's houses. And there were some pretty sweet little houses along our way. Mind you, not LA gigantic villas, but still really nice by European standards. When we arrived in St. Ives, we got some lunch at a fish and chip spot that was recommended to us by our Airbnb host, and after a rather wet start to our day, we got really lucky with the weather in St. Ives. Beautiful sunshine, just the right amount of fluffy clouds in the sky, and a beautiful town for us to explore. That really made me miss my scrambler. I really like this shot as it sums up the seafront area pretty well. People sitting on benches enjoying the view, those fancy black and gold trash cans, and a seagull flying overhead. I also tipped off a seagull to pose for me right above this little sign, and it worked out perfectly. Anyway, my wife and I decided to split up once again, not in terms of our relationship, but just in terms of her going window shopping and me going to explore and taking some photos. And so that's exactly what we did. When I met back up with the missus, we decided to grab an early dinner and went to a little burger place that was supposed to have the best bird burgers in town. Well, so my wife went for the wings. She did good. You know, the place really looked great at first and also on the pictures we found on Google. And the service was super nice and everything, but the food was not to our taste, let's put it that way. So we ended up just eating about half of it before we fled in disgust. Since it was still pretty early though, we decided to just get back to our Airbnb, get the car and drive to a nearby lighthouse for sunset. Apparently though, we were not the only ones who had that exact idea that evening. Probably a Nikon shooter. Oh, did he just catch something?
Yeah, sounds like a mouse.
Oh yeah, he got something. That's professional wildlife. Oh shit. And that was professional wildlife photography brought to you here on Toby Stink's channel. These guys are on a mission. So obviously, just like those other 36 photographers in the area, I didn't want to just sit around enjoying the evening and the beautiful sunset and the scenery with my lovely wife like an idiot. I wanted to take some unique photos. But I was facing an issue, and this time around it wasn't just the 28mm focal length of the Leica Q2. Okay, so I just realized the issue that obviously the whole island, including the lighthouse, are going to be backlit with the sun setting right behind it. So yeah, that's not great. But anyway, let's try to make it work. Looks real pretty though. Real pretty. Real pretty. Now obviously I could have just gone for a silhouette type of shot, but with the 28mm focal length, that really didn't seem to make a lot of sense for me. I could have also just used a tripod and fused an image together with multiple exposures, but I didn't have a tripod and I'm not into that nerd shit. So instead I exposed for the highlights and then just traced the bejesus out of those shadows in post, which turned out alright. Not great, but not too bad either. Also, on a side note, while it was hilarious to watch half a dozen photographers simultaneously trying to get that truly unique shot, it also somehow made the whole thing feel like an event. Much like the recent solar eclipse where everybody just gets together to enjoy the moment. Main difference being, of course, that it was just a sunset on regular Thursday. With that being said though, it was really a wonderful moment and certainly up there in terms of top moments of this year. Sadly though, this was already our last full day in Cornwall, which made the entire thing a bit bittersweet. On day 6 then, we had to leave Cornwall and head back to the southeast end of England, and that meant that even though we would still spend a full day in England, it already felt like our holiday was sort of over. And as much as I enjoy a good road trip, I sort of always run out of steam towards the end. It's just that sort of feeling of having all of those new and wonderful experiences already behind you and the worries of everyday life just creeping back up on the horizon once again. Anyway, we decided to make the best of it, and in order to do so, I decided not to use the Leica Q2 for a change, but instead take the Fujifilm X100VI with me, because I actually hadn't used that camera even once the entire holiday. So we had a rather slow morning, eventually packed up our stuff again and drove to St. Ives for one last quick breakfast at the Cornish bakery, as well as a bit of shopping. First though, we had to buy some sunscreen because we actually managed to get a bit of sunburn the day before. What a nice bike. Not exactly in the best of conditions, but real pretty. When we arrived in St. Ives, I took a couple of snaps of the city from up above, and I also got a shot of the Triumph TR6 Scrambler mod riding by with the rider waving at me as he went past. Other than that though, I didn't exactly take a lot of photos that day. That's not because of the Fuji, however, it was more that, as I said earlier, I was running a bit out of steam and yeah, I just wasn't feeling it. Anyway, I bought 2 new pairs of Tims, we got some breakfast, and then it was really time to wave goodbye to St. Ives and hit the road. The rest of the day was super uneventful, which I guess is a good thing since we were driving all day and an event would most likely just mean an accident, I guess. But anyway, we arrived safe and sound at our last Airbnb right after sunset, and it was this cute little barn thing, which apparently used to be a staple of the owner's horse back in the days. After a night full of nightmares of being hunted by the tortured ghost of a horse, we woke up fresh as a daisy and were greeted by blue skies and sunshine. We had some lovely breakfast outside, which was kindly provided to us by our Airbnb host, and since the whole outside area was still a bit wet from morning dew, I also got to use my Halter Force seating pad to keep my bottom all nice and dry. After taking in the serenity of that place for a while, we eventually packed up our things one last time and went on our merry way. And yeah, that was part 1 of our baby moon, I guess. If you made it this far in the video, thank you. Your dedication is well and truly appreciated. So yeah, overall Cornwall was obviously just beautiful and everything. And it was also really nice to just spend this much time with my wife, especially knowing that she's carrying our kid. But let's talk about the stuff that really matters. Gear. So the Leica Q2. It performed flawlessly once again. It's truly just a tank of a camera and it really doesn't give a damn about the weather conditions. Unlike, I have to say, the Sony a7 IV, on which I'm recording right now, which actually froze up and crashed on me about 6 times or so during that trip. Mind you, it really got a good workout on that trip, recording all of the footage for this video in 4K S-Log3 10-bit 422, so that's no easy task to do, but yeah, it crashed on me quite a few times and I had to take out the battery and all of the stuff, and it was just a bit unreliable. Also, some files just randomly disappeared and reappeared for whatever reasons. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on with my Sony a7 IV today, because it keeps crashing on me and apparently a lot of the video files are deleted. I'm not quite sure if it's recording right now. It was a bit of a situation, but yeah, I guess it all worked out in the end. The only thing that I would really do differently gear-wise the next time around is that I would take my companion element backpack instead of my GoRuck GR1, because the companion is certainly more capable as a camera bag, and since I was hauling around a lot of gear, I don't know why I picked the GR1, but the element backpack would have certainly done a better job, especially considering that it was also raining a lot of the time and the element is certainly a lot more waterproof than the GR1 is. But yeah, great trip. I hope you liked it too, even though this is certainly one of the longest videos I've ever made. I would also appreciate some feedback on this particular format. But anyway, please excuse me now because I have to work off the 5 extra pounds that I gained last week. And once again, thanks for watching. Until next time, take care. Bye.